Alright, hi everyone, how's it going? And welcome to another video. Now, the last video I did was on American Werewolf in London, and it really got me thinking about wolves and werewolves. And I began doing some research, went down a few rabbit holes, and I came across something known as the Beast of Gevaudan, and that is what I want to do a video on today. Now, the Beast of Gevaudan was this wolf-like creature, although no one really knows what it was. And it attacked people in the Gevaudan region, or the Gevaudan province of south-central France. And it was attacking people between the years of 1764 and 1767. And the Gevaudan region of south-central France is very remote. The soil is very rocky, so not a lot of crops are grown. However, the people raise livestock such as sheep and cattle. And it was around 1764. Now, keep in mind, this was just 1 year after the French were defeated by the British in the 7 Years' War. So this was just 1 year after that. And so in 1764, a woman noticed this wolf-like creature coming toward her herd of cattle that she was raising. And they scared the cattle. However, this wolf-like creature, and she described it as being like a wolf, but not a wolf. And it was getting closer and closer, and then one of the bulls that she had scared it off, and it ran off. And this is usually how it was depicted as looking. You know, like I said, like a wolf, but not a wolf. As you can see in this picture, it looks very serpentine or feline. It does have the head very similar to that of a wolf, but its tail looks like the tail of a lion in a lot of ways, and it was described as having a tail that was tufted, like that of a lion. So, shortly after this, the Beast of Gevaudan did attack somebody, and it would attack in a very violent fashion. It would rip people's throats out and tear them to pieces, and that's what happened shortly after the first sighting. And these attacks continued. And so much so that it eventually caught the attention of the king. Now, one thing I want to mention is typically wolves don't attack people. In a lot of countries, they're not really known to attack people. They generally tend to avoid humans. However, that does not seem to be the case in France. And I don't really know why that is, because from the year 1200 to 1920, there have been 10,000 documented fatalities in France from wolves. So, why is this? Why does this happen in France and not other places? I mean, could it have something to do with the fact that France, throughout its history, tended to be the epicenter of a lot of warfare? You know, who knows? Maybe that led to food shortages. But either way, there are a lot of documented wolf attacks in France. And like I said, not a lot other places. So this Beast of Gevaudan, eventually, like I said, he caught the attention of the king, King Louis XV. And King Louis XV decided he was going to send an individual by the name of Duhamel down there with some hunters, and they were going to go and kill the beast. So they went down to the Gevaudan province, and they were looking for the beast. Now, Duhamel dressed some of these men up as women because the beast's main victims were women and children. So they thought maybe they could deceive the beast somehow. However, they weren't able to do that, and eventually they were unable to find the beast. Now, there was another family of wolf hunters known as the Donevals, and the Donevals were from Normandy, and they had killed 1,200 wolves. So the king decided he was going to enlist the aid of the Donevals. He had the Donevals go down there. Like I said, it was this family of wolf hunters from Normandy. They had 8 bloodhounds with them. They were tracking the beast, trying to find it. They did shoot and kill some wolves, but not the Beast of Gevaudan. Now, around this time, there was a woman who was crossing a stream, and she came face to face with the Beast of Gevaudan. She had a long spear shaft with a bayonet fastened to it. The beast lunged at her, but she was able to stab it with this bayonet, and the beast fled. And the king then had her named the Maid of Gevaudan. That's what she became known as. And in 1995, they actually built a statue commemorating this. There's a statue of this woman fighting off this Beast of Gevaudan. So, yeah, I did want to mention that. Also, there was another incident involving some children that were being chased by the beast. One of the children, an individual known as Jacques, managed to lure the beast into a bog where the beast was caught. It was caught in this bog. It was unable to get out. And then these children went to get some hunters, but when the hunters got there, the beast had fled. It got out of this bog. The king was so impressed with the bravery of this individual named Jacques that he agreed to pay for all of his education. So then after this, the king is not really sure what to do. You know, Duhamel didn't have any success. The Donevals didn't have any success. So he then sent his personal gun bearer, an individual by the name of Francois Antoine. And he sent Francois Antoine, along with some hunters, down to the Gevaudan province to kill this beast. And they looked around for it, tried to find it, and pretty quickly they found a very large wolf. And Francois Antoine shot the wolf in the eye, but the wolf charged right toward him, and it was coming right at him. And as it was coming at him, he then began to load his musket, but it was getting closer and closer. Then one of Francois Antoine's men saw this, and he shot the beast, and the beast fell down dead. So they then took this beast, they stuffed it, they put it on a carriage, and they sent it to Versailles, where it was brought before the king. The king then announced that the beast has been slain. He gave Francois Antoine all these accolades. He was even allowed to put a slain wolf on his coat of arms. So the king then mentioned that, okay, the beast has been slain, that's it. However, shortly after this, the attacks continued. The beast hadn't been slain, and more people were being killed. Altogether, it said this beast would attack and kill 113 people. Some people claim it was only about 40, but either way, everyone does admit that there was something in this Gevaudan province that was killing people at this time. Now, there's also a newspaper writer from France who began to really sensationalize the whole story. And he wrote in a way that would be very reminiscent of how P.T. Barnum would promote his circus in the 19th century. You know, he would write these stories about the Beast of Gevaudan, and it would be like the Beast of Gevaudan was this savage beast from the deepest, darkest depths of the unknown, and it was ravaging the countryside. That really caught people's attention. You know, people really began to take interest in the story. Some people have called this one of the first ever viral stories. But yeah, it really caught people's attention. It was even printed in articles by this journalist, were even printed in newspapers as far as Boston. So it really began to catch on, this whole story. Now the king is really concerned about, was really concerned about what to do, but what happened was he would not acknowledge the fact that the killings were still happening. He believed that, okay, the beast was dead and that's it, it's over. However, like I said, the killings had continued. Finally, an individual by the name of Jean Chastel, who was a local hunter, went out and shot some kind of wolf creature, and then after that, the killings had stopped. That was it. And altogether, they lasted from 1764 to 1767. And the killings then stopped. Now, legend had it that Jean Chastel was able to kill the beast with a silver bullet, because at this time it was believed that silver represented purity, and silver was the thing people would use to kill witches, that only a witch could be killed with silver. But then people began to kind of see this Beast of Gevaudan as possibly being a werewolf, so they began to think, well, maybe silver could be used to kill a werewolf as well. So legend had it that Jean Chastel used a silver bullet to kill this Beast of Gevaudan. Whether or not he did is not known, but that was just kind of a legend. And the origin story of the silver bullet being needed to slay a werewolf, that comes from this story of the Beast of Gevaudan. So now this Jean Chastel had slayed this Beast of Gevaudan, and same thing, they brought this beast up to where the king was. By the time it arrived, it was rotting. The king didn't even want the naturalists of Paris to take a look at it. Instead, he just wanted it buried, because he already felt that the beast had been slain. He didn't know what this thing was. And they then buried it somewhere, I think on an undisclosed location. It's not really known where it was buried. But they did look inside the stomach of this beast that Jean Chastel had slain, and they did find human remains. And they also found some meat that appeared to have been cut. And also the beast, I should mention, had these strange surgical markings on it. But, it was buried. No one knows for sure where it was buried. And like I said, that was it. The killings had stopped. Now, the next thing to really talk about would be, what was this? What was the Beast of Gevaudan? What are the theories? One theory that was very popular was that it was a young male lion, because it was described as having this black stripe on its back, and young male lions are said to have a black stripe on its back. There's another depiction of it. Now, this animal kind of looks like the combination of like a hyena, a bear, and a lion. But yeah, like I said, no one was really certain as to what it was. Some did, like I say, suspect it was possibly a young male lion. Now, there was a movie that came out in 2001 called The Brotherhood of the Wolf. And spoiler alert, I am going to talk about this movie. In this movie, you have the Beast of Gevaudan, and the Beast of Gevaudan is going around killing people, and it turns out it's actually a lion wearing armor. And it's being used, this lion wearing armor is being used by the secret society known as the Brotherhood of the Wolf. And the Brotherhood of the Wolf are using this lion in armor to kill people as a means of undermining the power of the king. And they believe that if they could do that, and they could get people to distrust the king, they'll be able to take over all of France. So yeah, Brotherhood of the Wolf, good movie. It's an action movie, but it also has elements of being a horror film as well. So, that was one of the theories. There was also a theory that the Beast of Gevaudan might have possibly been the work of a serial killer. There was that. Even some people had believed that possibly Jean Chastel himself, the one who killed the beast, was the one who was using the beast to kill people. That's another one of the theories. And that was why he was able to shoot and kill the beast so quickly, because he decided at some point that he would just kill the beast and then claim to be the slayer of this beast. So, yeah, no one really knows for certain, but there is some belief that, yes, this actually could have been done possibly by a serial killer, but no one really knows. There's also theories that this beast was an animal, like I already said, like a lion, possibly a striped hyena, that had escaped from a menagerie of a wealthy aristocrat. Now, in those days, wealthy aristocrats would have these menageries, and what menageries were is they were essentially private zoos. Like, wealthy people today may have a collection of fancy sports cars, but at this time, wealthy people and wealthy aristocrats would display their wealth by having these, private zoos where they would have exotic animals, lions, bears, elephants. Maybe an animal such as a hyena or a lion could have possibly escaped from a menagerie. One of the more popular menageries I know of was the Tower Menagerie in London, that housed a lot of exotic animals until from around 1204 until 1831, when it became the London Zoo. So, yeah, could it have been an animal that escaped from a menagerie? Who knows? Another possible idea that I heard was that it could have been the remnants of like a prehistoric animal, like a dire wolf or something called a bear dog. Other people suggested it could have been a Caspian tiger. Another interesting thing, in southern France, not too far from Gevaudan, there was a cave that had been discovered, and this cave had been occupied by humans going back 36,000 years. And on the wall of this cave are these drawings of cave lions, very well drawn. Could this have been the remnants, or could this have been a cave lion? Cave lions went extinct, but maybe a few remained in this remote region of South Central France. Who knows? There are other theories that maybe it was a wolf-dog hybrid, because sometimes wolf-dog hybrids can get larger than even wolves. But no one really knows for certain as to what this was. Some people suggested maybe a Spanish war dog that was being used. But like I said, no one really knows. One theory, and this is the one I kind of think might be true, is that it was actually more than one wolf that was attacking and killing people, because it was attacking and killing people within a 50-mile radius, so maybe it was actually more than one wolf. But no one knows for certain, but that's kind of an idea I like. That definitely seems possible. But yeah, so I did want to talk about that because I did really find it to be an interesting story. And initially I was only going to do a video on the Beast of Gevaudan, but then I began going down other rabbit holes, and I began looking into the Paris wolf attacks of 1438, and that's what I want to talk about next, because I do feel that does kind of connect with the whole Beast of Gevaudan story. Now, the Paris wolf attacks were when there were a number of wolves that were surrounding the city of Paris, which was a walled city at this time. These wolves were said to be very hungry because this was during a time period known as the Little Ice Age, and a lot of their food sources had died off. And you also had the plague at this time. And these wolves were attacking people. And finally, the people in Paris decided that they would just take bodies of people that have died of the plague, throw them over the walls, and maybe they could infect these wolves with the plague. And that didn't seem to work, because as far as I know, wolves don't really get the plague. But these wolves, like I said, were just surrounding the city, and they were led by a very large and reddish wolf that was said to be missing its tail. Possibly it had been caught in a trap or a gate. And the name of this wolf was Crypted. And like I said, a very large reddish wolf. And Crypted was the leader of this wolf pack. But what's kind of strange is Crypted was said as leading these wolves not like a pack, but more like a military unit. And eventually, these wolves found their way into the city through some opening. And then Crypted would have wolves encircle people, and then he would get in the center of the circle where a person would be. And he was said to be so powerful, he would rip out people's throats with just one bite. So he's said to be a very powerful wolf, and he was leading these wolves. These wolves were attacking people. Finally, the citizens of Paris grabbed a hold of a bunch of pike weapons and spears and whatnot, and they began to, fight off these wolves and slay a lot of them. Then what happened when it looked like most of the wolves had been slain and beaten back, Crypted lunged at one of the soldiers who had a spear in hand, and the soldier impaled Crypted on his spear, but Crypted then slid down the shaft and tore the soldier's throat out. Both of them were then slain. And eventually these wolves were defeated and beaten back. It's a very strange incident, I feel. And there used to be a plaque near Notre Dame Cathedral, because this was said to take place right in front of Notre Dame Cathedral. And I don't know if that plaque is still there or not, because I do know there was a fire at the cathedral not too long ago. But yeah, this plaque did talk about this incident. So I did want to talk about it because this Crypted was said to be very large, powerful. He would, rip out the throats of large mastiff dogs very easily. Just said to be a real powerful, monstrous beast, kind of like the Beast of Gevaudan. So that's where I feel it kind of connects. And I did want to mention that. Like I said, there was some mention that the wolf was of a reddish color. Some people suggested maybe it was an Italian wolf that crossed over into France. Italian wolves are said to be reddish in color, but who knows? So ultimately, wolves would be hunted to extinction in France by 1953. However, in the 1990s, some wolves did cross the Alps from Italy and then moved into France. And now there's about 1,000 to 1,500 wolves in France. So I did want to mention that. And like I already mentioned, there were some people who began believing that this Beast of Gevaudan was possibly a werewolf. And I do want to talk about that. And I did kind of go down that rabbit hole and began researching some things about werewolves and kind of the origin of werewolves. And pretty much the first story ever written, the Epic of Gilgamesh, has an incident where a person is transformed into a wolf. Gilgamesh doesn't want to marry the goddess Ishtar because he heard that she had turned a former lover who was a shepherd into a wolf. So also though, in addition to that, you have other wolf stories. For example, in ancient Greece, you had a historian who lived around 500 BC named Herodotus, who was traveling in the land of the Scythians, which is now located in Eastern Europe. And he heard a story about these people of a tribe known as the Neri that were said to live in a village, and every year for a few weeks they would be transformed into wolves. And Herodotus himself says he doubts this is true, but he did talk to a lot of people who really did believe this. So, now when someone transforms into a wolf, that's referred to as lycanthropy. And this comes from a king known as King Lacan, and he was the king of Arcadia. Zeus had found out that he was doing some bad and wicked things, and he wanted to see what he was doing. So Zeus disguised himself as a regular person and then went to the palace of King Lacan. When he got there, he was welcomed in by the king, and the king served him dinner, which was human flesh. Zeus then took off his disguise and destroyed King Lacan's palace with a lightning bolt. He then transformed King Lacan into a wolf, saying that if you're going to act like a beast, then you shall be a beast. And he turned into a wolf. And the whole idea was that King Lacan was still kind of the same, even now that he was a wolf. It was just his true nature had now been revealed. That was how that story went. I did want to mention that one. But there's other stories. Now, the whole idea of, someone transforming into a werewolf from the full moon is said to go back to ancient Rome. There was an ancient Roman writer who wrote about how a traveler and a soldier were traveling down a road at night, and possibly the full moon triggered the lycanthropy in the soldier, and the soldier transformed into a wolf. So another thing I do want to mention, probably a lot of these, shape-shifting stories and whatnot have their origin with a lot of cultures, because there are a lot of cultures that will have stories, in their lore and legends about shape changers. For example, in Celtic legend, you have a creature known as the puka, and the puka is this like rabbit-like goblin, but they're said to have the ability to transform into horses, people, a goat, a dog, possibly a wolf. But they're known as pukas. And also among the Native Americans, you have something known as the skinwalker. And skinwalkers are said to be like evil shamans, but they have the ability to transform into wolves. So a lot of cultures have different types of shapeshifters. In France, you even have a werewolf known as the loup-garou, and they're said to transform into werewolves as the result of curses and witchcraft, and they were said to attack at night. Which, the whole thing with the Beast of Gevaudan, mostly the Beast of Gevaudan attacked in daylight. So I did want to mention that. But, so there are a lot of different stories about wolves and werewolves. One interesting one is something known as the vukolek. The vukolek is the Slavic werewolf. And these were, people who would be bitten by a vukolek, and then they would transform into one, usually because of the full moon, but they could also shapeshift into werewolves at will. But if they stayed in the wolf form for too long, they would be wolves forever. So they had to, at some point, change back into humans. And they were said to retain their intelligence, and they were said to not become evil, that, they would pretty much, if they were a good person, they would remain a good person. Unlike the werewolf in American Werewolf in London, where it becomes evil when it becomes a werewolf. These vukoleks were a bit different. They're also said to be like village defenders. They would protect villages. They could just, like I said, transform into these wolves at will. So, I did want to mention that, the Slavic werewolf. So, I did want to talk about all these things. I definitely found this story to be very interesting. No one really knows what the Beast of Gevaudan was, and a lot of different stories about it, even movies that were made about it. So, that's all I want to talk about. If you watched this video, as always, I thank you for watching, and have a good night.